Welcome back to the Accessible Art History YouTube channel. This week, I'm moving forward in my AP Art History curriculum videos. Unit 2 covers the entirety of the ancient Mediterranean. Since this encompasses multiple civilizations and time periods, I thought it'd be a good idea to break this unit down by civilization. So to kick things off, I'm going to cover the 6 works from the ancient Near East. To learn more about them, keep on watching. Before we dive into the works of art, it's important to understand what art historians meant by the term Ancient Near East. This categorization covers a number of different groups and cultures over a large geographic area and time span. They center around Mesopotamia, known as the land between two rivers and/or the Fertile Crescent. This is considered the cradle of civilization because it's where we see the first permanent and complex settlements pop up. Today, it covers the modern nations of Egypt, Iran, Syria, Jordan, Israel, Lebanon, the Gulf states, and Turkey. Much of our knowledge about the ancient Near East comes from archaeological digs led by people from wealthy Western nations in the 19th and 20th centuries. They were slightly obsessed with finding artifacts related to biblical stories and figures. It's important to note that this initially skewed our information on the subject, but scholarship in recent years has been working to correct that. Instead, it's now focusing on how advancements developed in the area that laid the foundation for civilization. This also means, though, that a lot of these ancient Near Eastern objects are in museums in Western nation and not their homeland. Alright, now that we've got that info out of the way, let's dive into the works. The first one is the White Temple and Ziggurat of Uruk. It was built in the late 4th millennium BCE and was dedicated to the sky god, Anu. Both the ziggurat and the temple were constructed of mud brick because stone was rare in this area. Standing at around 40 feet tall, this complex would have dominated the landscape. Additionally, it was painted a bright white, which would have shone brilliantly in the sun. So you may be asking yourself, what's a ziggurat? Well, it's essentially a large braced platform. There are 4 sloping sides which meet to form a flat top. On this platform, the temple would have been built. This was done to help set the temple apart from the rest of the landscape and to literally raise it above all other buildings. The White Temple was orientated on the ziggurat platform with the cardinal direction points. There were 3 entrances, but none of them actually faced the ramp that led from the ground to the platform. This was a deliberate choice by architects to force people to walk around the temple and contemplate its beauty. As with many Sumerian temples, it was built on a bent axis approach and served a double purpose. Not only was it a place of worship, but it was a storehouse for food and supplies. The next work is a statue called the Tel Azmar male worshipper, and he dates from between 2900 and 2600 BCE. He is also from Uruk, the ancient name for Tel Azmar, though he is from a different temple than the one we just discussed. It's constructed of alabaster with limestone and shell used for details. The statue stands at just under a foot tall and is part of a group of 12 that were found buried in the temple complex. They were carefully placed in the ground, indicating that this was purposeful and meant to preserve them for as long as possible. The most striking detail of the statue is his large, nearly bulging eyes. This, combined with his clasping hands, shows us that he is deep in prayer. Most likely, a wealthy member of Uruk society commissioned this piece to represent himself. That way, even when he wasn't at the temple for worship, his proxy could stand in for him at the temple and pass his prayers on to the gods. This next piece is perhaps the most famous example of ancient Near Eastern art. The Standard of Ur was discovered in a royal grave in the 19th century and dates from around 2600 BCE. The word standard is a bit of a misnomer because art historians aren't entirely sure what the original purpose of this object is. It's more likely that it was a decorated box versus something that was carried on a large pole. 2 panels from the Standard of Ur have survived to the modern era. Each is divided into 3 registers. First, we're going to look at the war panel. Interestingly, this is the earliest depiction of war in the history of art. The top register shows the king standing with prisoners of war. Note that the king is the largest figure in the scene, showing that he is the most powerful. We call this hierarchy of scale. The middle register shows soldiers going into battle, as well as more prisoners of war. Finally, the bottom register shows chariots being pulled by equine-like animals. Even though they are 2-dimensional, there is still a sense of movement. The peace panel is all about celebrating the spoils of a victorious campaign. Once again, viewers can see the king in the top register. He is surveying the banquet scene before him. On the 2 registers below, there is a procession of servants bringing animals and baskets of goods to him. This king, whose name has been lost to history, wanted to show his victory in war and how it benefited his community. The Code of Hammurabi is one of the most important writings in the history of the world. It survives on a giant stone slab and dates from around 4,000 years ago. Not only does it feature a relief image of a king and god, but it's the longest inscribed text that survives from this period in history. The text itself describes nearly 300 laws from Babylon. For our historian, this piece not only tells us a lot about the artistic traditions of the ancient Near East, but also contains valuable information about the political and legal system at the time. King Hammurabi was king of Babylon from circa 1792 BCE to 1750 BCE. Besides the code, Hammurabi is most famous for his military conquest. During his reign, Assyria was conquered and brought under Babylonian rule. This meant that nearly all of Mesopotamia was in his control. Due to both his political and military might, Hammurabi was seen as a god during his own lifetime, and worship continued after his death. In fact, he was so popular that records from the period after his death show a spike in babies being named after him. The law code is inscribed in 44 columns of cuneiform text and are written more as precedents than actual laws. Therefore, first an action is described and then its consequences stated. The majority of these laws deal with the two most important aspects of life in the ancient Near East: agriculture and family. These laws also feature the first written instance of innocence until proven guilty, and is one of the first times evidentiary support is mentioned. This code was incredibly impactful in society, including up until our era. In fact, both the United States House of Representatives and the United States Supreme Court have small relief statues of Hammurabi in their buildings. Another important part of the stele, especially for us art historians, is the relief carving. This piece shows two figures facing each other. The man on the right is the god Shamash. He's the god of both the sun and justice. The viewer knows he is a god because of his horned crown and his throne. On the bottom of the throne there are small mounds meant to represent the mountains that Shamash would appear over every morning during sunrise. On the other side of the carving, another man is standing. This is King Hammurabi himself. He wears the traditional headpieces and robes of a Babylonian king. Hammurabi stands ready and waiting to receive a staff and ring from Shamash. These are traditional ancient Near Eastern symbols of kingship and rule. This is a message of propaganda showing that Hammurabi and his laws were divinely inspired. It's also important to note the size of the figures. Because Shamash is sitting, the two men are right around the same height. In ancient art, across many cultures, this meant that they were of the same importance. Obviously, when standing, Shamash would have been taller. This preserves the distinction between man and god. Similar to the Sphinx of ancient Egypt, Assyrian Lamassu were mythical protection creatures. They have the head of a man, the body of either a bull or a lion, and the wings of an eagle. By combining these animals together, the power of the figure was multiplied. Lamassu sculptures were placed outside of palaces and public buildings. These ones, now in the Louvre, are from the citadel of Sargon II. In order to assert his power, Sargon built a new capital city. He named it the Fortress of Sargon, and it is believed to have been the largest city in the ancient world at the time. Archaeologists believe that these Lamassu stood at the gate that was built to honor the god Nergal, an Assyrian god of war and plague who ruled over the underworld. If you look at them from the side, you might notice that they have 5 legs. This is because they were carved to appear in motion, striding forward to protect the city. The final work of the Ancient Near East collection is the Audience Hall of Persepolis. Although the site is now in ruins, Persepolis was once the ceremonial capital of the Achaemenid Empire. At the time, this empire ruled over an estimated 44% of the human population. It was occupied for about 200 years, from circa 515 BCE to 330 BCE, when it was conquered by Alexander the Great. The name derives from the ancient Greek word for the city of the Persians. It was built by Darius I, whose name can be found on various inscriptions throughout the ruins. The large building program was continued by his successor Xerxes. The Persepolis complex consists of a large walled platform with 5 large buildings on it. It was not the biggest city in the empire, so its purpose isn't entirely clear. In fact, it isn't even clear where the king's quarters were. Some archaeologists postulate that it was used for religious ceremonies because the site has a sacred connection to the god Mithra, as well as links to the Nowruz, the Persian New Year festival. But because of the king's presence and the large building program, it was likely used as an administrative center as well. The ancient Near East is a fascinating period of art history to study because it is the foundation for the history of humanity in the Western world. This is where we see the first settlements start to pop up thanks to the fertile farmland created by the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Because they were able to settle, humans had the time to create objects to teach us about the past many thousands of years later. you.